Hello and welcome to part 6 of the Hockey Basics series. I'm Mario Black, and today I'm going to give a deeper dive on some other common penalties that were not the physical ones I talked about last week. So let's go over the 7 I'm going to talk about today. These penalties are delay of game, specifically the puck over glass variation of delay of game, high sticking, holding, hooking, slashing, too many women on the ice, and tripping. For pretty much all of these, I've got video clips for them, so hopefully they'll help you out. So let's get into the description of each. All right, let's start with delay of game. Delay of game is a broad penalty type with 10 different definitions, but almost all delay of games come from the third definition in the rule book, which I'll focus on here, which is the puck over glass that you see in the title. In order for this penalty to be assessed, the team in their own defensive zone has to directly play the puck, and that puck has to go directly out of play. If the puck is tipped or deflects off of any object, whether that be a player, a stick, the glass, maybe it hits the half wall, if it tips off of anything before it impacts something out of play or over the high glass, then it is a delay of game penalty. If the puck is in the neutral zone or the attacking zone and it is played out of play, it is not a delay of game penalty as well. It has to be a clean play on the puck. You'll often see this waved off if two sticks come in and the puck pops out of play due to the sticks coming together, since the play was considered impacted by an opposing stick and not cleanly played out and over the tall glass. It can be a penalty if the puck is batted with a hand or even batted with a stick while in the air, as long as the exceptions already discussed don't happen. So if the puck's in the air and you whack at it with a hand or you whack at it with a stick, you're cleanly playing the puck. It's not considered a deflection in that case. Another exception worth highlighting on its own is that if the puck goes into a team bench, then there is no penalty. The benches don't have the high glass, and it's easier for a puck to end up out of play in that area, thus they don't assess a penalty when this does happen. These kind of delay of games can only be a minor penalty. Unlike last week, a lot of penalties that will be discussed this week don't have the safety concerns like those did, so often they're only minor penalties. As I mentioned, there's 10 types of delay of game penalties, so it may be called for a different action that's not just putting the puck over the glass. A few examples include a player falling on the puck deliberately, a goalie coming out of their crease and covering the puck, although if the goalie is cutting down an angle, they're allowed to cover the puck out of the crease, but if they kind of just wander out on their own and it's pretty egregious, they will call it a delay of game penalty. And one that's pretty rare but has a special rule associated with it is deliberately removing the goal from its normal position. Normally this would be a 2-minute minor penalty, but if it's done in the last 2 minutes of a game or overtime, it automatically becomes a penalty shot. Almost every delay of game is shooting the puck out of play, and most people will use the term delay of game only when talking about those incidents, but there are other times it can be called, so it's a good idea to have that in mind, just as a heads up in case it comes up, because it's not super common, but every now and then you'll see one pop up. All right, on to the first video. I don't have a replay of this, I just have it in live action. They don't like to show replays of delay of games, but for reference, Vancouver is in the white jerseys and Minnesota's in the purple. Minnesota doesn't really matter here, but you can see with the still image, the play is starting in Vancouver's defensive zone. The player on the bottom of the screen is about to play the puck, and they will shoot it out of play. So you can see the player comes here, has the puck, they'll shoot it up, and the puck will end up going over the glass. And if the clip were to go on further, you'd see a lot of people waving that, hey, there should be a penalty there, for Minnesota at least. And the ref ended up calling it a delay of game. I'll play it again a couple more times. So the Vancouver player shoots the puck up, and it goes directly out of play. It doesn't hit anything on the way out. It goes out of play. One thing to kind of note is you can see at the bottom of your screen where the image has stopped, the penalty box area where the glass kind of juts out toward the crowd. If it goes into the penalty boxes, it's considered delay of game because it's gone over the tall glass. Now, if it were to go into the benches on the opposite side of the glass, it would not be a delay of game because it's not the tall glass. It's just the short half wall there. Play this one more time. So the Vancouver player has the puck, shoots it up, and it goes out of play, and they're assessed minor for delay of game. Alright, next up is high sticking. There's two different kinds of high sticking. One in which the player plays the puck with a high stick, which is something that can lead to a stoppage in play or a goal being waved off. However, that is not a penalty. I'm going to specify the penalty version for this slide. High sticking is generally pretty straightforward. If your stick hits an opponent in the head or neck area, you'll get called for a high stick. The rule specifies that players are responsible for their own stick. The contact does have to be above waist height, so if a player falls to the ice and they catch an opposing stick on the way down, then the opposing player likely won't be called, as they're more likely placing their stick in a natural position along the ice. It gets a little less natural if your stick is at, head height level or, above waist height. That's when the high sticking penalties tend to get called. There is one exception that comes up every now and then. If a player catches somebody with a high stick during a shooting motion, whether it be during the windup or the follow-through, then it's not a high sticking penalty. It's actually a common theme for a lot of rules that when you're making a play on the puck, it wipes out certain infractions, and taking a shot on the puck certainly falls into the camp of making a play on the puck. There's a note carved out for something like swinging a stick into the air to bat a puck, since that's not considered a normal motion, and it's not a normal wind up or follow through, so you can get called for that. Only if you're taking a shot with a puck on the ice and the stick gets up high, whether you're winding up for the big shot or you're following through after the shot. High sticking is almost always a 2-minute minor penalty. Since the players wear full face shields, it's extremely uncommon to see the double minor variant where a player is bleeding. It is an automatic double minor if blood is drawn, but that's incredibly uncommon since the player's full face and head is covered with the equipment. It's more commonly seen in the NHL if you're someone more familiar with that, where they'll high sticking penalty is called and the referee will check to see if there's blood drawn, but you don't really see that here. It could happen if a player catches a mask wrong, but it's something like not very likely to be seen. If there isn't an injury, it will be a double minor. It's also a match penalty if there's a deliberate action. So if you're, head hunting and take a swing at somebody deliberately, then you'll be called for a match penalty in those cases and probably get some supplementary discipline as well. All right, here's the video example. In this case, New York's in the teal and Boston is in the white. It'll be the Boston player number 53 high sticking the New York player number 98. It'll be kind of in the center of the screen for the first replay. Then they'll cut to another angle where it'll be kind of to the left of center, but it'll come up pretty quick. So right now the stick comes up and hits that New York player in the head. And then the replay will play a little bit more and then it'll cut back to a different angle and you'll see a little bit left of center. The stick kind of comes up and knocks the player in the head and the head will whip back a little bit and you'll see the New York player react to it. So I'll play it for you again. With all these, I'll play it 3 times. So the stick comes up, whacks. That becomes a high stick. If there is an injury here, it would be a double minor. In this case, it was a pretty run-of-the-mill. Stick got, caught up too high. So it was a high stick. And you can clearly see on the third replay, they're not making a shot on the puck. It's just they're trying to lift the stick, and they end up just completely missing the stick and getting the head, which is a pretty common way you see high sticking called, is when a player tries to lift another opponent's stick to disrupt their play, and they miss and kind of catch them in the head. But, yep, that's the example of a high stick. All right, next up is holding. I'm sorry to say, but hugging is not legal during the course of play. You're allowed to do it before and after a game, though, so there's no penalties then. Holding is pretty much exactly as it sounds, grabbing another player to restrain them in some way. This is often seen when a player has one hand on the stick and their other hand, often called their free hand, grabs onto the opponent in some way. It can also be an arm wrapped around that restrains an opponent as well. Players can use their free hand to push an opponent, for instance, but as long as that free hand and arm are not holding on or committing another infraction, then they're good. There's also a penalty called holding the stick, which comes up if a player holds on to their opponent's stick. You can't just grab your opponent's stick. That is a penalty. Holding is only a minor penalty. There's no upgrades for it. If there's a full-on grappling match going on, it would not be holding. It would be fighting or something else. If somebody gets grabbed from behind when they're on the breakaway, then it becomes a penalty shot situation. And here's a highlight of it. Montreal, for reference, is in the maroon, and Seattle is in the white. It'll be the Montreal player committing an infraction. So you see them come to the boards here, and this is all normal and fine. But number 17 will come out and then grab the Seattle player right here. It's full-on grab and spin them around. I'll play it for you again. So look for them to come off this kind of quick little check, and then you can see them clearly restrain the player, grab them. That player's trying to play the puck, and they get, stopped because of the grab. So one more time. Montreal player comes off. Seattle player is about to play the puck, move it out, and nope. Montreal player grabs them, and they get sent to the box for 2 minutes. Next up is hooking. Hooking is similar to holding, except instead of grabbing with a hand or an arm, the stick is what's doing the restraining in this case. These penalties are pretty often called when a stick, especially the blade of a stick, gets into a player's midsection or hands and then restrains them in some way. Like, they're trying to move forward and the stick pulls them back a bit, or that pulls back on the hands. Usually when a official sees a stick in that area, they'll call a penalty. If it's only a stick-on-stick instance, so if your stick is hooking and it only gets the other team's stick, then a penalty shouldn't be called in these cases. This penalty can be tricky, since it should only be called if someone is restrained by a stick in some way. So if a stick is just laying on you, then it shouldn't be called. But it's a common trend across many leagues, including the PWHL, to call the penalty if the hands are touched, even for a brief moment. You can argue that if the hands are just slightly touched, it is a restraining action, because say you're moving the puck around, obviously you're using your hands on the stick to maneuver around. If you kind of get a stick in there, even if it's for a brief moment, that could impede what you're trying to do. I've never seen a hooking escalated beyond a minor penalty, but there are major penalty variants that do exist if injury occurs. Like I said, I've never actually seen it called. Usually if something like that's going to happen, it'll probably be another penalty. Like holding, this will be called a penalty shot if done while the opposing team is on the breakaway. I wouldn't be surprised if this, along with tripping, is the most commonly called infraction that leads to penalty shots. All right, now for the example. In this case, Ottawa's in red and Montreal is in white. And this will be a very quick one. It won't look like much, but it'll be a stick on the hands that they call for hooking. So the Montreal player comes in, gets that stick in the hands, and it gets called. It's very quick, very subtle, but I'll show it to you a couple more times. So the Montreal player is reaching out with the stick, and it kind of gets in the hands, and you can see the Ottawa player kind of trying to fight through it to make a play on the puck, and that's probably why it was called in this instance, because they have the puck, they have the clear positioning. The Montreal player is reaching out pretty far with the stick, and the Ottawa player is kind of trying to fight through that. So you can consider that a restraining action, because they're trying to fight through that contact to, make what looks to be, in this case, a pass, or to even just carry the puck further. So I'll play it for you one more time, and look out for that. As the stick comes in, and they're trying to fight through it, and they kind of lose the puck in the process as well, although they end up getting it back and making a pass. All right, next up is slashing. Slashing is a pretty common penalty seen when a stick comes down and whacks another player. As with high sticking, a player is responsible for their stick, and if they hit somebody aggressively with it, they'll be called for slashing. Unlike some other stick infractions, hitting an opponent's stick can also be called a penalty. This is commonly seen when somebody comes down on somebody else's stick and the stick breaks. However, it can still be called even if the stick doesn't break, but 99% of the time it's going to be the stick breaking or somebody knocking the stick out of somebody else's hand of kind of an aggressive chopping action. I also discussed how the hands are protected on the hooking slide. They're also protected here, and a stick coming down on the hands will often be called slashing, even if the contact wasn't all that aggressive. And my clip for this one also kind of shows that as well. It's not a super aggressive chop, but it does come down on the hands. These are most often minor penalties, but given the act of chopping down on somebody with a stick, it can escalate to major penalties or match penalties if severe enough. All right, here's an example. New York is in the white and Toronto is in the blue. The Toronto player will be the one committing the infraction. So you see the New York player coming across, and the stick will kind of hit them in the hands. Play it a couple more times. It's a pretty quick clip. But watch for the Toronto player as they kind of come by and they reach back with the stick and hit the New York player in the hands. Coming by, and they catch the hands, and a New York player falls over. Probably fell over due to the leverage of the situation. They're trying to, make a play on the puck, and the stick comes in, and it kind of causes the leverage. This doesn't make it tripping. However, the stick coming down on the hands does make it slashing, as it does impede them in some way. I'll play it for you one more time. So the Toronto player comes and gets the hand with the stick, and they call the slashing in that case because it does impede the New York player in this specific instance. Here's a penalty that's pretty self-explanatory. Too many women on the ice. I'll speak on this as if it's a normal 5-on-5 play, with each team having their full complement of 5 skaters and a goalie in net to avoid confusion. However, if there's a shorthanded situation or a goalie is pulled for an extra attacker, subtract or add a player, accordingly, depending on the circumstances. A team can only have 5 skaters on the ice during the normal course of play. If more are in the play, it's a bench minor penalty for too many women on the ice. There is a gray zone within 5 feet of the player's bench, so a player could sub in for another player before the player they're subbing for has fully left the ice. A couple things to highlight here is that a player entering the ice cannot make a play on the puck or check or, deliberately contact an opponent until the teammate they're subbing for is fully off the ice. Fully off the ice is defined as both skates being off the ice. The inverse is true as well. If a player is coming out of a game, that player cannot play at the puck, or throw a check or make deliberate contact if the person subbing for them has already entered play. To protect instances of an opponent gaming the system, if a puck inadvertently hits a player or there's an inadvertent contact made with another player, then it's not considered a penalty. If a team has the puck and the other team is substituting, they sometimes like to slide the puck into that pile of players substituting to try and draw a penalty, but they can't just bank a puck off somebody coming off the ice and have that be a penalty. That player coming off the ice has to make a deliberate play on it while the player that's coming on for them is already on the ice. Unlike every other penalty I've talked about, these penalties are called bench minors. All other penalties are served by the person that commits the penalty. In the case of a bench minor like this one, it's served by anyone on the team that was on the ice at the time of the penalty. Alright, I do not have a video for this one. I have a still image because all you need to do here is count. But let's count the number of purple jerseys on the ice. Here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That is one too many. I can assure you in this case it's a normal course of play, and Minnesota has their goalie in net, so they actually have a total of 7 players on the ice. So one more than their full allotment. Now, player number 1 is close to the bench, but you can see she's clearly facing the play and engaged with the play, so she's considered a part of it, which makes it a penalty. Say if player 2 was closer to the bench and clearly coming off the ice, then this would not be a penalty, as player 1's coming onto the ice, but they haven't interacted with the play at all. They're just kind of getting themselves set up to be engaged in it. But you can see in this case, player number 2 is pretty far away from the bench, clearly not skating toward the bench and not within that 5 feet grace zone. So in this case, it was called a too many women penalty. All right, last week I forgot to include this in the big penalty slide, despite it being one of the absolute most common penalties in the world. But the last one I'll talk about today is tripping. Tripping is pretty self-explanatory, using a stick or body part to trip an opponent. There are plays that can look like trips but are not. One common one is if a player has their stick in position and an opponent goes over that stick, on their own and trips up. Oftentimes this won't be called tripping. The rule says that a player, can't place their stick in a way that causes the trip. And in this exception, the opponent is the one doing the action to create the trip. There's also weird leverage plays sometimes where players will get tangled up and one or both will go down. This comes down to how the official sees it, whether it's a trip or not, or if, someone just got kind of leverage on them and it just ended up taking one of the players to the ice. Tripping is only a minor. If it's done to an opponent on the breakaway, it becomes a penalty shot. Tripping and hooking are probably the 2 most common infractions that lead to penalty shots, since they're from behind, and hooking, you're kind of reaching out your stick to impede somebody, and tripping, you're reaching out your stick and just end up knocking them down. So let's show the clip. In this case, Ottawa's in the white, and they commit the action of tripping, and Vancouver's in the darker blue, and you'll see their player is the one that falls over. So the Vancouver player skates up, and the Ottawa stick kind of gets in there and knocks them over. So in this case, the stick is clearly getting into the area that causes the Vancouver player to trip up. If that stick had already been there, it might not be called, although this is kind of a weird one. It'd be a pretty unnatural place to put a stick. But as I show it to you again, you can see the Ottawa stick kind of whip around and cause the opponent to trip up. I'll play it for you one more time. So the Vancouver player is skating through, and you can see they're clearly tripped up by that Ottawa player. For the ones where the stick is already downed and the player kind of goes over it, those are incredibly tricky. I see them called sometimes. They technically shouldn't be called. They're sometimes not called. It's really up to the official, and I think it's pretty hard a lot of times to say if that stick was already in a natural position and the opposing player kind of came over it, or if the stick was kind of put there on purpose and it caused the trip. Those can be really difficult to adjudicate. All right, but that's not it. I've got a lightning round. I'm going to try to speed through these other penalties as quick as I can. Probably won't be that quick, but I'll do my best. Most of these are uncommon, although there's a couple that pop up from time to time. These are just ones I think that are good to know. This is not the full list. There is a lot more penalties that are quite uncommon. I figure since this is kind of an intro series to get new fans into the game, I don't need to go deep dive into all of those. So charging is someone who skates or jumps into an opponent in any manner, usually seen if somebody doesn't glide into a check but continues taking strides into a check. Spearing is thrusting the blade end of a stick into the opponent. It's a double minor if you even attempt it and you fail. It's a major if it connects, and it's a match penalty if there's an injury. Butt ending has the same repercussions as spearing, but it's just with the other end of the stick, not the blade end, but the part that's called the butt end. Same repercussions, a double minor if you attempt it, a major if you connect, and a match penalty if there's an injury. Elbowing is pretty much as it sounds. It's extending the elbow to make contact with an opponent. The elbow doesn't have to connect with the head, but in practice it's typically called when there's head contact. Illegal check to the head is one I'll spend a little time on. It happens when the head is the main point of contact on the hit. It's called a major, but it can be downgraded on review. It can only be downgraded if the player that was hit put themselves in a vulnerable position or changed their body position right before the contact in a way that made the head contact unavoidable. And in these cases, it gets downgraded to a minor penalty for accidental head contact. Any major illegal check to the head is automatically an ejection as well. This is probably the most common of the ones that are on this list. It comes up every once in a while when a player catches somebody too high. Illegal equipment is just that, using equipment in violation of the rules. There's a lot to unpack with this one. It's a very uncommon penalty. Kneeing is when someone leads with their knee and makes contact with another player. Can be anywhere from a minor to a match penalty. These often get upgraded due to the severity of knee-on-knee hits when players are moving at full speed in open ice. Fighting is not allowed in the PWHL. It's not allowed in the NHL either, but you get penalized there, but only for 5 minutes. In the PWHL, you get ejected as well. The rulebook considers fighting to be repeated punches or two players wrestling in a way that the linespersons have trouble getting in the way. In practice, roughing is usually called instead of fighting, given that roughing doesn't automatically result in an ejection, like fighting does. As of this recording, there have been no fighting penalties called, although there's certainly been incidents where they could have been called. They just didn't want to call them, probably because they didn't want to get players ejected. Unsportsmanlike conduct is a catch-all for anyone that crosses the line of their conduct. This one can be called on coaches too. Headbutting is exactly as it sounds. It's an automatic major penalty at a minimum. Slew footing is a variant of tripping when a player kicks out an opponent's leg from behind. This can be combined with using their arms to push the upper body backwards while they're kicking the lower body forwards. Due to the severity of the action, this is an automatic match penalty. Throwing equipment is exactly as it sounds. If it's done toward a player on a breakaway, it's a penalty shot. Illegal handling of the puck comes in a couple of different flavors. Players can catch a puck in the air, but they must immediately place it on the ice at their feet. If they close their hand on it or skate in any way to gain an advantage, it can be called a penalty, commonly called closing the hand on the puck as a penalty. Also, if they cover the puck with their hand while it's on the ice or pick it up off the ice, this is also a penalty. If those latter two incidents happen in their team's defending goal crease, then it's a penalty shot as well. Leaving the bench, in this case, is when a player leaves the bench to start or inserts themselves in an altercation. It's a minor penalty plus a game misconduct for players that do this. It also comes with an automatic 4-game suspension. This is incredibly uncommon, but has happened once. And lastly, diving or embellishment. It's rarely called, and I'm of the belief that it rarely happens, even though a lot of folks like to think it happens more than it does. It's simply if a player embellishes an action to try to draw a penalty. So say if a stick goes into the skates of a player, and that player falls in a way that's clearly not how someone would fall in that circumstance, then they can be called for embellishment. It's not often called on its own. There can be a hooking on one team and then an embellishment on the other. The hook may have been legit, but the player was being a bit too over the top trying to sell the hook. I think people feel this happens more often than it's called because ice has a very slick surface, and sometimes a quick action, maybe a quick little poke at the legs or something like that will cause a player to trip up in what looks like an unnatural way. But just given the way, people are skating around, cutting left and right real quick, the surface is slick, just one little nudge to, the lower part of the body might cause somebody to fall in kind of a silly or weird way. One thing players will do is if their opponent is in a position where their stick or arm is just about in the spot where a penalty can happen, they'll kind of lean into it to make sure that, they do something like trip over the stick. If the stick is kind of between their legs, they'll take an action to kind of make sure that their skate gets into that stick and that stick does the job of tripping them. These are almost impossible to catch as embellishment. Usually it's considered a veteran move to draw a penalty. Embellishment does come with supplementary fines as well if it does happen. Thank you very much for listening. That's all for this one. I don't have a topic for next week as of yet, but I'll certainly get something out. I do have a video planned for the draft and one planned for the expansion draft. However, expansion's currently happening. This was recorded the day of the Hamilton and Las Vegas expansion. Detroit's already come, and looks like we're getting another one out west here in the next week as well. But no rules have been set for any of the drafts, so I kind of want to wait until I know what the rules are before I do a video on it. I suspect there'll be a few little differences from last year. So if you have any comments, feedback, if you have any topic ideas, feel free to leave it below. Try to get something out next week. It'll probably be a pretty short one, or who knows what it'll be. But if you get something in the feedbacks pretty quick, I'll certainly look at that and potentially do a video on that. But appreciate you watching. Hope you learned a few things about penalties in these last few videos. I'm one to kind of give a lot of grace to officiating. I think it's an incredibly difficult job, something I certainly could never do. I mean, I'm, not above it in the heat of the moment. If I see a call go against my team that I don't like, I'm certainly going to put my arms in the air and say, how can he call that? But it's an extremely tough job. When we're working our normal 9-to-5 jobs, we don't kind of have the pressure of having our mistakes replayed in slow motion for the world to see our mistakes. So, yeah, referees can make mistakes. A lot of mistakes are relatively minor. I don't think a lot of officiating calls have a huge, significant impact on the game. There are exceptions. Not a fan of those, but I'm not going to belabor the point. Referees try to do the best they can. Linespersons as well. So, hope you learned something today. Hope you enjoyed watching. As mentioned, leave any feedback you have, and I hope you have a great day.